You're watching the History Fella channel. In this video we're looking at the Crittenden Compromise. The Crittenden Compromise was an unsuccessful proposal to permanently enshrine slavery into the United States Constitution and thereby make it unconstitutional for future Congresses to end slavery. It was introduced by United States Senator John J. Crittenden on December the 18th, 1860. It aimed to resolve the secession crisis of 1860 that eventually led to the American Civil War by addressing the fears and grievances of Southern pro-slavery factions and by quashing anti-slavery activities. The Crittenden Compromise is not to be confused with the Crittenden Resolution, which provided that the Union would take no actions against slavery. The compromise proposed 6 constitutional amendments and 4 congressional resolutions. Crittenden introduced the package on December the 18th, and it was tabled on December the 31st. It guaranteed the permanent existence of slavery in the slave states and addressed the Southern demands in regard to fugitive slaves and slavery in the District of Columbia. It proposed reinstating the Missouri Compromise and extending the Compromise line to the west, with slavery prohibited north of the 36th parallel and guaranteed south of it. The Compromise included a clause that it could not be repealed or amended. The compromise was popular amongst Southern members of the Senate, but it was generally unacceptable to the Republicans, who opposed the expansion of slavery beyond the states where it already existed. The opposition of their party's leader, President-elect Abraham Lincoln, was crucial. Republicans said the compromise would amount to a perpetual covenant of war against every people, tribe, and state owning a foot of land between here and the Tierra del Fuego. The only territories south of the line were parts of New Mexico Territory and Indian Territory. There was considerable agreement on both sides that slavery would never flourish in New Mexico. The South refused the House Republicans' proposal. This was approved by committee on December the 29th to admit New Mexico as a state immediately. However, not all opponents of the Crittenden Compromise also opposed further territorial expansion of the United States. The New York Times referred to the whole future growth of the Republic and all the territory that can ever belong to the United States, the whole of Mexico and Central America. The amendments to the Constitution that were proposed were: Number 1. Slavery would be prohibited in any territory of the United States now held or hereafter acquired north of the latitude 36 degrees line. In territories south of the line, slavery of the African race were hereby recognized and could not be interfered with by Congress. Furthermore, property in African slaves was to be protected by all departments of the territorial government during its continuance. States would be admitted to the Union from any territory, with or without slavery as their constitutions provided. Number 2. Congress was forbidden to abolish slavery in places under its jurisdiction, such as a military post within a slave state. Number 3. Congress could not abolish slavery in the District of Columbia so long as it existed in the adjoining states of Virginia and Maryland, and without the consent of the district's inhabitants. Compensation would be given to owners who refused consent to abolition. Number 4. Congress could not prohibit or interfere with the interstate slave trade. Number 5. Congress would provide full compensation to owners of rescued fugitive slaves. Congress was empowered to sue the county in which the obstruction to the fugitive slave laws took place in order to recover payment. The county, in turn, could sue the wrongdoers or rescuers who prevented the return of the fugitive. And number 6, no future amendment of the Constitution could change these amendments or authorize or empower Congress to interfere with slavery within any slave state. The congressional resolutions were: number 1, that fugitive slave laws were constitutional and should be faithfully observed and executed. Number 2, that all state laws that impeded the operation of fugitive slave laws, the so-called personal liberty laws, were unconstitutional and should be repealed. Number 3, that the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 should be amended by equalizing the fee schedule for returning or releasing alleged fugitives and limiting the powers of marshals to summon citizens to aid in their capture. And finally, number 4, that laws for the suppression of the African slave trade should be effectively and thoroughly executed. President-elect Abraham Lincoln vehemently opposed the Crittenden Compromise on the grounds that it opposed any policy permitting the continued expansion of slavery. Both the House of Representatives and the Senate rejected Crittenden's proposal. It was part of a series of last-ditch efforts to provide the southern states with sufficient reassurances to forestall their secession during the final session of Congress prior to the Lincoln administration taking office. The Crittenden proposals were also discussed at the Peace Conference of 1861, a meeting of more than 100 of the nation's leading politicians. The conference, led by former President John Tyler, was the final formal effort of the states to avert the start of war. There too, the compromise proposals failed, as the provision guaranteeing slave ownership throughout all Western territories and future acquisitions again proved unpalatable. A February 1861 editorial in the Charleston Courier summed up the mood prevalent in the southern-leaning border counties as the Crittenden proposals went down in defeat. Men at Washington think there is no chance of peace, and indeed we can see but little. Everything looks gloomy. The Crittenden resolutions have been voted down again and again. Is there any other proposition which will win, that the South can accept? If not, there comes war, and woe to the wives and daughters of our land. Beauty will be but incentive to crime, and plunder but pay for John Brown's raids. Let our citizens be prepared for the worst. It may come. This statement by editor George Whitcomb came in response to a fiery letter to the editor, excoriating disunion from U.S. Representative John William Noel, whose district included Charleston. If you found this video informative, please feel free to like it and subscribe to the channel.